So he talks a little bit about the immigration bill, which is something that a lot of Kamala supporters bring up that I've noticed. It's like, oh, well, Trump stopped the immigration bill from happening. And my response to that is usually, okay, well, how does Trump have more power over bills passing than the actual current administration? You're kind of making the case for Trump when you say that, oh, Trump stopped an immigration bill while he was running for president. So listen to how J.D. Vance kind of explains this.
What do you think is the goal behind allowing this to take place? Now, first of all, one of the things that Kamala Harris has said was that there was a bill that could have fixed the border problem, but that Donald Trump did not want it to take place because he wanted to keep this as a political talking point.
Totally dishonest. Totally dishonest.
What was the bill?
Okay, here was the bill. What happened is, okay, let me talk about what the bill does first of all. Okay. Number one is it sets a maximum cap on the number of illegal immigrants that we can have before the border shuts down. That maximum cap is 2 million illegal aliens per year. It's like 1.85 million to be more precise. That's number one it did. Number two, it codified what's called catch and release, where a person comes into our country, they're an illegal immigrant, but they say, no, I'm not an illegal immigrant, I'm an asylum seeker. And so their claim for asylum gets adjudicated, but because there's a backlog, because we have so many, their claim isn't going to be adjudicated for 15 years. So rather than having that person wait in Mexico, we give them a work permit, and we give them legal status, and we let them come into the United States of America. That's called catch and release. Donald Trump's policy was you have to wait in Mexico.
That policy, too, if you think about it, also benefits the prison industrial complex and, you know, the way that they spend money on these private institutions to take care of immigrants and all that stuff. So it just keeps the problem going and, you know, gives the politicians something to say. So look, we did something to the public on.
We're not going to catch you and then release you into the country for 15 years. It codified that. In other words, even if Donald Trump became president, and this was why he really hated it, is that he would not be able to undo catch and release if he won the election. It would be codified into American law. Third thing it did, nothing on the border wall, nothing on an immigration system called parole, which is supposed to be a case-by-case, you grant parole to people who are fleeing tyranny, but Harris has used parole to the tune of millions upon millions, mass parole, whole categories of country have been paroled into the United States. It didn't do anything to solve that problem. So it wasn't a border security bill. It was an amnesty bill. Now, in addition to what I just said, it also gave some table scraps to Border Patrol. And that is what allows them to hinge onto that one thing and to say it's a border security bill. No. It was a mass amnesty bill. It would have made the border problem 10 times worse. And that's why they ultimately pushed it. And that's
so this next piece of this next clip here, I think is so good. And it's probably my favorite clip from the whole conversation. He just nails it on this. So listen to
why Republicans fought against it. By the way, like 6 Democrats.
Again, I was shocked to hear a politician running for office say something along
voted against that piece of legislation because they thought it was kind of a disaster. So it was not a bipartisan border bill. And in fact, it was much more bipartisan, the opposition to the legislation, but it has allowed Kamala Harris to go around and dishonestly claim that she cares about the southern border, even though when she came into office, they bragged about undoing all of Donald Trump's successful border policies. They did exactly that. And then we had the massive migrant invasion that we've seen in the last 3 years.
And I think it was good on you in the debate with Tim Walz when they fact-checked you. They tried to check you and say that this has always been in place. And you stepped up and said, no. This app is new, and this app was specifically used for shipping.
Yes.
And now they're using it to schedule people to illegally come into the country. Here's the question.
Sure.
Why? Why is this happening?
Here we go. Listen
what do
to
you
this.
think? I mean, obviously speculation a little bit, but what do you think the motivation of allowing this to take place and the disproportionate number of people that have moved to swing states, which is also like a little suspicious?
So depends on how many tinfoil hats do you have in this room?
I got a lot, dude. I got a wardrobe.
We can get real serious about this real quick. Pretty crazy very quickly. Look, I think what is obvious is, and I've seen this in the halls of Congress, I've seen it very explicitly. You talk about lobbying, and we obviously talked about in the context of other industries. There is a massive corporate lobby for cheap labor in the United States of America. And that is, I think, the main thing that's going on. Think about this. If you've got millions of illegal aliens Okay, let me tell you a story. In 2017, 2018.
Fucking nails it. That is what I want to hear. Yes, that is I have said this thousands of times probably, but if you really want to stop this problem, you start sending SWAT teams into Walmart and factory farms and rounding people up and fining them, a couple 10K for everyone this problem will end real quick. It will go down to almost nothing if you make the people doing the hiring accountable rather than the people, trying to make a living for themselves.
When I was in the private sector, I was at a business conference dinner, and I was seated next to the CEO of one of the largest hotel chains in America. This is, I think, probably 2018. And the guy is going on and on about how much he hates Donald Trump. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, why do you hate Donald Trump so much? Because again, I was sort of a Trump skeptic in 2015, and at this point, I was kind of starting to really get on the Trump train. And he said, well, the reason I hate Donald Trump, he says, is because Donald Trump's border policies have cut down the number of illegal immigrants. And because I can't pay illegal immigrants under the table anymore, I have to pay American workers, and they want much higher wages. And I was like, this guy just admitted it. I was like, holy shit, this guy just admitted it. Now,
a crime. That is
like straight up monopoly man evil shit that this guy admitted to. And I was like, my wife, who's very apolitical, she was actually at the dinner with me, and she's like, come again? You just said you don't want Americans to get decent wages. Like, that is the best argument for Donald Trump's immigration policy, is that American workers are getting higher wages. And this is why this corporate CEO hates it. So whatever the industry is, you've got a lot of people who want cheap labor, and they don't want to pay American workers higher wages. That's a big part of it. So I think there's also,
I'm going to stop there. Well,
a power dynamic to it in particular.
So I don't buy the conspiracy theory shit that it's to rig the vote, because if they want to rig the vote, they have machines to do that. I don't buy the idea that illegal immigrants are being imported here to, vote for Democrats. It just doesn't make any sense when you have voting machines that you can easily rig. But that point right there, he sounds like me. That is the point I've been making for years, that there is, and he actually backs it up with an anecdotal, albeit story, about a guy who runs a bunch of big companies that wants the cheap labor. So it's interesting and actually very fantastic to see a mainstream political candidate talking like this, even though it's on a format that people are going to hear it in Joe Rogan, So let's see. Let's go to the comments for just a second here. Ellen says, hold on a sec. She had something. The only solution is to stop displacing people to begin with via coups, détente, free trade. I couldn't agree more. And that's the part that he doesn't get into in this interview that did disappoint me a little bit. But I mean, their entire platform is end the wars and bring the money home. So, I think that somewhat addresses that. But we'll see. Trump famously try to coup Venezuela when he was president, but again, it was a different time. He had a lot of people around him. So I'll give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt on that. It's much easier to be an asshole when you have the power than it is when you're trying to attain it. And I realize that, so one last piece I want to talk about in this, and this is the part that kind of disappointed me, is they talk a little bit about weed and psychedelics, and JD Vance is definitely a little bit backwards on this, but also I think the reason he's so anti-drug is because he grew up with a drug addict mother, and he saw how far addiction can take people.
That kind of gets put aside is, I know a lot of veterans in particular, and a lot of people with some severe trauma that have had psychedelic therapy, and they've had to go to other countries to do it. They've done some of it illegally in America, but I know far too many guys who have had PTSD, who have had an incredible experience and been alleviated of all these.
And this helped them.
It helped them tremendously.
Okay. What is it? Is it like MDMA, or is it what?
MDMA
what do they use?
was what MAPS was using. They were running these studies, and they got close to FDA approval, but then now they're being sent back to say they have to do more studies. So the problem is, like, you can't really do double blind.
So that sticks out to me. Re-listening to this, they got stuck in FDA approval. We know why they're getting stuck in FDA approval, because natural medicine is a no-go for the FDA because they work for the pharma industry. They work for the people that sell drugs, and that's been proven beyond a doubt. I don't even have to dig up an article to show you.
Blind placebo-controlled studies on MDMA. Either you're on it or you're not on it.
Right.
And it's pretty obvious.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, sugar pills don't have the same effect.
Yeah, it just doesn't. But the therapy for people that are suffering from severe PTSD has been incredibly beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
They've shown that with the MAP studies, but they've also shown it with, like, anecdotally. I know a bunch of different guys that have gone down to Mexico and had psilocybin journeys and all these different things where they've encountered these experiences that have made them sort of rethink who they are, alleviated them of a lot of the stress and a lot of the trauma that they've experienced, and given them peace. And the concept of Schedule 1 is that there's no medical benefit.
Right.
And if these people are experiencing, first of all, cessation of smoking, people that have had issues with addiction, ibogaine treatment's another one that they've found, which is not something that anyone would ever abuse recreationally. I've never done it, but apparently it's an excruciating experience. But the rate of curing addiction is tremendous from it. And these things have been denied. People have had denied access to it because of this scheduling issue. Like, there's we discussed it yesterday on the podcast. Like, the LD50 rate was, like, lethal dose at 50% is impossible to achieve with psilocybin, and yet it's still illegal. And that there's all these people that have reported
Psilocybin.
So you can't die from taking too many mushrooms.
Mushrooms, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And, but you can synthesize it. It doesn't have to be.
I see.
But the scheduling of these things, in particular, like marijuana is legal on a state level with, I think, almost half the country now, or if not more. Yeah. But yet federally illegal. And if you go to the history of why it was federally illegal in the first place, it coincides with the what happened with prohibition of alcohol. Right after prohibition of alcohol, they turned their eyes to marijuana, and there was a lot of political influence by Harry Anslinger and William Randolph Hearst, and there's a lot of maneuvering, and that's where the Reefer Madness films came up and all this propaganda stuff. It was
jazz cabbage. It was a racist thing. They used it to criminalize black people and Latinos because they predominantly partook of the kind herb.
Make it illegal essentially to make the textile, the hemp illegal.
Interesting. Okay.
There's a long history to it. It's basically more about the commodity of hemp than it was really about the drug itself. In fact, the term marijuana was never used for cannabis, which has been used for thousands and thousands of years. The term marijuana was created by William Randolph Hearst and put in Hearst newspapers. It was originally, marijuana was a Mexican slang word for a wild tobacco.
Really?
It had nothing. So they started writing these stories about blacks and Mexicans smoking this new drug, marijuana, and raping white women. And most of this
I had no idea this history.
It's so
That's
crazy. The story's
always
so
the
nuts.
scare tactic. They're coming for your women.
But it all came about because of an invention called the decorticator. And the decorticator is it's an invention that allows them to economically and effectively process hemp fiber without slave labor. So when the cotton gin came along, people stopped using hemp as much because it's much more difficult to work with, and they started using cotton for clothing. Okay. But before that, they'd use hemp. And this is non-psych.
This is a whole sidebar history of marijuana that I didn't even know. And I consider myself pretty well versed.
So active hemp.
Yeah.
It makes a superior paper. It does. There's a bunch of uses for it, completely outside of the psychoactive aspect of it. William Randolph. There was the cover of, was it Popular Science magazine? Popular Mechanics magazine, hemp, the new $1 billion crop. And it was all about this invention. So then the propaganda machine goes into full scale, and then they start. This was in the 1930s.
Okay.
So they start, here it is, the new $1 billion crop, 1938. And this is because of this invention, the decorticator. So
Yeah.
it solves the problem. You can see it there. Solves the problem more than 6,000 years old. Hemp, a crop that will not compete with other American products. Instead, it will displace imports of raw material and manufactured products produced by underpaid coolie and peasant labor. It will provide thousands of jobs for American workers throughout the land. So everybody was really high on hemp as a commodity because of this new machine that you could process hemp fiber with, where you can make much more superior paper, superior clothing.
Yeah.
Like it's like canvas. Literally, the Mona Lisa was painted on hemp. The first draft of the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp. They used to use it for paper back then.
Yeah.
So then William Randolph Hearst, who owns Hearst Publication, and also owns all these paper mills and forests filled with trees.
Okay.
So they,
This
to
goes back to the
combat
financial
this
incentive
industry,
point.
exactly. And so we're still trapped under this propaganda that was distributed in the 1930s by incredibly powerful people.
Yeah.
And this is why it's illegal on the federal level. And even though you have medical marijuana that's been shown to help people with chemotherapy and wasting disease, help people that have appetite problems and people in chronic pain,
There you go. That's why it's not legal on the federal level. It's going to cut into someone's profits.
still listed as a Schedule I drug federally, which to me is unconscionable. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay. So, like, first of all, we're not trying to be clear, because I'm speaking as a vice presidential candidate. We're not trying to throw people in jail for smoking weed. That's like very much something that we're not interested in doing. The one thing that I have, like, my attitude on this stuff is kind of live and let live. Like, keep it in your home. I don't like smelling it when I take my kids to the park, right?
But keep
that's
it,
not good.
Keep it Daddy,
home.
What's that skunk doing here?
Yeah, exactly.
So I kind of disagree with that take, because it's the same argument you could make about gay people. Keep it at home. We don't want to see two guys holding hands in the park or whatever. It's a reality your kids are going to have to deal with in public. So I think that's a little bit off. But I do like that he said we're not trying to arrest people for smoking pot. That does make me feel good.
But like, keep it at home. I don't want to throw people in prison. That's not what we're trying to do.
I don't think you should be drunk at the park either, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Same exact principle. The thing that I wonder about is
legal so we can smoke it in bars.
I do. There's a part of me that worries a little bit about kids doing a lot of this stuff.
Yes.
And I wonder, to your point about consent and the brain's development and all these things, I really worry about, do you have an increase in usage among minors? And so what I'd like to get is some sort of legal regime that, again, it's not like criminally prosecuting at all people for smoking a joint, but also where we can actually ensure that it's kept out of public spaces. That's kind of my attitude towards it. And I think that's the right approach. I mean, on the psychedelic thing, what would need to be done? Because I know, to be clear, I know absolutely nothing about this. So this is me, asking a question, not committing.
I have to say, I love that too. I love that he said, I know absolutely nothing about this. It takes a lot of confidence and security to admit when you're not well-versed on something like this, especially in a political race.
Into some public policy, you have to be careful with this stuff, especially 6 days from an election. But I had never heard about, because I'm a veteran too. I served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, went to Iraq, went to Haiti once. And is there any like what is the pathway, I guess, or what do you think should happen for veterans accessing psychedelics?
Well, there's so many anecdotal stories about veterans experiencing relief that I think it should be available to them, especially veterans. I think that we put our veterans through.
But is it like an FDA thing, is making it possible for them to get the therapy? Okay.
Yes, and it's also the way it's scheduled. It's
because it's Schedule I, isn't it?
Yes.
But like if it had a medical use, presumably you would get it off of Schedule I.
Yes.
So why aren't we? I mean, I'm just fascinated by this. This is the first time I've heard about this. Like, why aren't we testing whether there is? Fair point. You can't do a double-blind placebo-controlled study, but you can definitely still study whether this helps people or not. Why aren't we doing that, or are we doing that? I'm just not aware of it.
Well, we're definitely not doing it. I mean, there's been some research. Johns Hopkins did some research on psychedelics, and they found similar benefits. There's also dangers, like anything that has profound effects on the human mind. There's certain people that are very vulnerable, and those people should not be taking these things. There's people that have a hard time with regular reality. They're barely hanging on regularly.
Yeah.
But I think the people that are not should have access to that, because I believe in freedom, and I believe in the freedom to explore things that have great benefits. And I keep going back to veterans because I think we require an insane thing of them. We take regular people who live in civilized society, we send them over to Afghanistan and Iraq and have them engaged in the absolutely most brutal thing that people do, which is war. They see their friends blown apart, they get shot, they see people die, they have to kill people, and then they come back here and then they're supposed to just acclimate. And there's no guidelines. There's no way to do it. There's no one can coach you through.
I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, The Hurt Locker, but that was a really good movie, actually. Catherine Bigelow, female director. But it kind of, I think, it kind of illustrates what Rogan was talking about. There's a scene in that when the guy was he's like a bomb diffuser, if you haven't seen it, in Iraq. And he's always in these really intense situations, life or death situations. Then he comes back to the States. And he's like pushing his shopping cart through this like pristine, these pristine aisles, and just like the shots and the way it's filmed just kind of give you this like insight into probably how some of these people feel. I mean, obviously you'll never be able to get it 100%, but it's as close as you can get, I think, in the expression of film.